Let's see what happens.
Hey, there's something leaking at the bottom.
Yeah, I got it. Well, another episode of Jay Leno's Garage, something a little bit different this week. I'm here in the Merlin section of my garage. The Merlin engine, I think, is the greatest piston aircraft engine ever built. We have the blueprints here. I've got a number of books on it, even got a Rolls-Royce Merlin manual. I've got two cars that have a Merlin engine in it. My 32 Rolls-Royce and, of course, our big Bentley. You've probably seen those in the restoration blog and featured on the show as well. Well, this is a new edition we just finished up. This is the engine as it would appear in an airplane instead of an automobile. This is a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine with the designation V1650-1. 1650 is the number of cubic inches, how big the engine is, and the -1 signifies that it's a single-stage, two-speed supercharger, which is back here. This is set up primarily for demonstration runs. It's not going to be in an airplane, and it's not going to be in a car. It's just a fascinating thing to see running, and the power it has, you feel it when you get behind the controls. Since it's for demonstration purposes only, obviously it needs fuel. Fuel goes on this side, about 5 gallons, and the oil goes on the other side over here. Come around with me. This is the oil tank here. This holds about 5 gallons of oil as well. Now, obviously, a Merlin needs way more oil than that, but as I said, this is just for demonstration purposes, so 5 gallons is more than enough. This here is the pre-oiler. Since this engine sits for, well, probably months at a time without running, you want to use a pre-oiler. What that means is that you turn it on and it literally pumps oil throughout the engine as if the engine was running, so everything is well lubricated before you get started. This engine was discovered down in Georgia in the early 80s by a man named Graham White. Graham White wrote the book on Merlin. Yeah, well, he literally wrote the book. Is he? Here's the book right here. Is he? Graham White. And he wrote the book. So he knows everything about these. Here's his picture. Rather handsome young man, as you can see. Well, the trouble with buying one of these and taking it back to your garage at your house is you need specialized tools and a number of things to rebuild these engines. They're extremely heavy. You need special jacks to get the heads off. So he rebuilt it as best he could on a limited budget, and it ran, but it wasn't quite perfect. It takes, 10 times as much effort to go that last 10% as it does almost the first 90%. He sold it, I don't know when. I bought it from the gentleman that he sold it to, who didn't really run it a whole lot. And I think it kind of deteriorated a little bit. I don't know whether it was outside or whatever, but it really wasn't up to snuff. When I got it, I did the history of it. I tracked it back to Graham. He was thrilled that I found it. I sent it up to Vintage V12s up in Temecula, California. My buddy Jose up there, he is a Merlin expert, along with Pete Regina. Pete Regina owns Pete Regina Aviation out of Van Nuys, California. He helped me with my Merlin when I had it in my Rolls. I've had that over 30 years, and I've driven on the street with a Merlin engine in it. And he helped me get this back into what would be considered airworthy condition. They just did a great, great job. I can't thank them enough. Let me show you what this engine looks like in pieces. Here's just a few of the engine disassembly and reassembly. Here, take a look. This engine runs on aviation fuel, which is 100-octane low-lead fuel. You can run 87 gasoline in these. They did during the war, but modern fuels are no good because the ethanol, the fuel, eat through these very sensitive carburetors. Ethanol is the worst thing in the world, especially for something like this. So we have to run it on 100 low-lead octane aviation fuel, which is fine. The vast majority of Merlins used updraft carburetors. The British Merlin used the SU carburetor. The American Merlin used the Bendix PD16 dual throat carburetor. It was, that meant 16 pounds per square inch per throat, so it was 32 square inches. The fuel air mixture is injected right here at the intake elbow into the suction side of the centrifugal blower, which is 2-speed. Now this is a single stage 2-speed supercharger, which means it only has one impeller but 2 distinct speeds. When the aircraft reaches critical altitude, it then shifts into the second speed, which is about 25,000 feet. That's the second critical altitude. This section here, between here and here, this is called the wheel case, okay? This is jam-packed full of gears and clutches. This not only drives the supercharger, it drives the ignition as well, okay? Ignition has magnetos, one on each side. Aircraft always has redundant ignition system. One mag lights the plugs on the intake side of the manifold. The other side lights the plugs on the exhaust side. Now, what they did in wartime, most of the times when these would come back in for servicing, they couldn't reach the plugs on that side, so they just do this side because, hey, it's wartime. You had to get back up there pretty quickly. These here are engine mounts, 4 altogether. This here is your starter motor. Now, the vast majority of American engines used any number of starter motors that were adaptable, but the Merlin only used this one. This was designed by Rolls-Royce specifically for the Merlin, and Packard just copied it when they built it. This here is for timing purposes, timing gears in there, so you can turn this to adjust things by hand. This gold-plated deal here, this is the oil pressure relief valve, okay? High pressure lubricates the crankshaft at 75 to 90 pounds per square inch. Intermediate pressure about 15 pounds per square inch. That lubricates the valve gear, and low pressure feeds the reduction gears. Now, we put a modern automotive type oil filter on here for obvious reasons. It's better than anything they had back in the day. This here is the oil cooler, okay? The way that works is oil is sucked out of the scavenger pump, sucked through the filter into the cooler, then back into the oil tank. Now this tube here, much like the Ducati Desmo, houses the shaft drive to the single overhead camshaft via bevel drive. The single overhead camshaft under this valve cover, and there's a 4-valve per cylinder engine there. Okay, under here, you have 4 valves, 2 intake, 2 exhaust. This is a 4-valve per cylinder engine. Okay, this part here, this attaches to the main shaft of the cylinder banks. Attached to the cylinder banks are the cylinder heads up here. This differs from common automotive practice where cylinder banks and the crankcase are usually just all in one housing. Here it's 2 pieces. Okay, this housing here, this contains the propeller reduction gearing. These are spur cut gears. These are precision cut and grounded. This being a liquid-cooled engine needs a radiator, of course, and this radiator is off a Canada North Star, sometimes called a DC-4M, which is powered by 4 of these big Merlin engines. You know, the great thing about the Merlin community is everybody helps one another. My radiator was all just eaten away, and there aren't any of these, and I called everywhere. And I located the Canada Warplane Heritage Museum. This is just a great museum up in Toronto. They had one of these radiators, and I was able to obtain that from them. But what I found out was, besides being a great bunch of guys, what amazing planes they have at this museum. They have a Lancaster bomber, the only one really flying that takes passengers on a ride. These guys rebuilt it themselves. I mean, we're just doing the engine here. These guys did the whole plane. Well, here, take a look at this. This is unbelievable. Look at this plane. You know, Canada was a tremendous ally during World War II. We in America tend to be a little myopic sometimes, you know. But up in Canada, they were working their tails off to build these planes. They used the Packard-built Merlin from Detroit, just like this one, to put in the Lancaster bomber. And the fact that these guys were able to rebuild this plane and actually fly it, it's really something to see. So if you're ever up in the Toronto area, be sure to check it out and say thanks to me, will you? Just, you know, a little name dropping thing. See what happens. Okay. This here is the header tank. This is how you fill it. You fill it with coolant or water right here. You fill it up to about here, and then the rest of this is air, and then it circulates much as it would in standard automotive practice. This propeller is a Hamilton E2350. This was used on a lot of aircraft from the period, and it's just a beautiful piece of machine work. I mean, look at this thing. And when we fire it up, wait do you see how this thing cuts wind. It's pretty unbelievable. This over here is your generator. This generator here is nothing special, just a 24-volt generator, and it's driven off, once again, the wheel case gears and all of that in here. So, oh, come around, let me show you the dashboard. You have a full complement of gauges here. You've got fuel pressure, you've got tachometer, you've got temperature, RPM, pre-oiler, left mag, right mag, starter, primer, boost, and of course your key. I'm not going to start this thing in here. What you have to do is take this thing outside, and then you've got to chain it down, because it'll literally pull the building down. It's pretty amazing. Imagine 4 of these on a Lancaster bomber. You got to get up to Canada to see that. Come on, we'll hook this up to the trail. We'll bring it outside, and we'll fire it up. All right, here's our dashboard. We have fuel pressure, manifold pressure, temperature, RPM, and oil pressure. This is our pre-oiler, left mag, right mag, starter, primer, and boost pump. Okay, you always want to have a check-off list with an airplane. Okay, first we want to have the throttle just cracked a bit. Mixture, idle, cutoff, mixture, there we go. Yeah, idle cutoff, there we go. Blower is on low. Master switch, okay. Then we have our pre-oiler, which is, where did our pre-oiler go? Here it is right here. Okay. See the oil pressure climbing? What we're doing is just literally flooding the engine with oil so everything is lubricated before we fire out. Okay. That ought to do it. Okay. Boost. Okay, mag's on. Left mag, right mag. Crank engine and use primer. Okay, toggle it on and off. All right, there we go. Let's see what happens.
Okay, there's something leaking at the bottom.
Yeah, I got it. There we go. Start it again. to give you some idea what it's like. I mean, we're barely off of idle. It was only 1,200, 1,300 RPM. Imagine this thing at 4,000 RPM. I mean, as I gave the throttle, I could feel it starting to pull it. I don't know what the forklift weighs, what, 5,000 pounds? This lifts the 10,000 pound plane into the air. So again, thanks to the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. Those guys, I can't thank them enough for giving me that wonderful radiator so I could make this thing a living piece of history. But those guys have really done the best part. Look, there's some planes taking off now. Look at that. Okay, it's Southwest. It's not exactly a Merlin, but you get the idea. But anyway, if you're ever up in Toronto, please check out that museum. I'm going to go the next time I'm up there because I want to see that Lancaster bomber. It's the only one you can actually get a ride in. So if you got a dad or a family member that's an airplane enthusiast and they'd like to ride in a Lancaster bomber, that's a great gift. I don't know how much it costs, but whatever it is, it's worth it because you'll never repeat it in your lifetime. There's only 2 in the world that fly, and only 1 will take you up in the air, and that's the one up there at the museum. So thanks to them, thanks to Jose, thanks to Pete Regina, and thanks to Graham White. Graham, thanks for saving this wonderful piece of history, and I just hope you enjoyed seeing it fire up and see what it was like. Maybe further down the road when we get this thing chained down, we'll open up so you see flames shooting out of it. Right now, I can't afford to pull down the building. See you guys later.
Mm-hmm.